The Jeffrey Epstein follies continue in Washington, and Republicans are divided and on defense. How did a story like this about the sexual abuser who died in 2019 become so preoccupying in Washington and among the press corps, if not among voters?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
That's our subject for today in Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of Wall Street Journal opinion pages. I'm Paul Gigot, the editor of those pages, and I am here with my distinguished colleagues, Kate Batchelder-Odell and Kyle Peterson. Welcome to you both. Now, on the one hand, I really can't believe we're talking about this story because it really is an old story resurrected by Republican bumbling. On the other hand, it is a talk of the Beltway, and it has caused the House Speaker, remarkably, to adjourn the House for the summer to get out of town so they didn't have to vote on a bill or resolution that said calling for the release of the files. So it's a remarkable kind of turn of events. Let's listen to Speaker Johnson explain rather defensively why he is attacking the Democrats for calling for the release of the files.
What we refuse to do is participate in another one of the Democrats' political games. This is a serious matter. We are not going to let them use this as a political battering ram. The Rules Committee became the ground for them to do that. We're not going to allow them to engage in that charade anymore. Why do I call it a charade? Because the Democrats are trying to play gotcha politics right now when, as the leader just pointed out, they don't have any moral high ground on this at all. They controlled the Department of Justice for the last 4 years. Has anyone forgotten? They had all these files the entire time. They sat on everything Epstein related for 4 long years while President Biden was in office.
Well, Speaker has a point there. The Democrats did have access to those files. Of course, it didn't erupt as a story, Kyle. And what he's talking about with the Rules Committee is there was a revolt in the Rules Committee, which Republicans control. They have the votes to control, but they weren't able to control it in this case. So all the rules that they could pass, which are the key to getting votes on the floor, couldn't move. So that led to one of the reasons that the Speaker cashiered the House for the summer. Let's first deal with the latest news, which is that the Wall Street Journal reported that Attorney General Pam Bondi had briefed President Trump some weeks ago that his name was in some of the Justice Epstein files. Trump, of course, had suggested, I think last week, that, I didn't know anything about that. Nobody told me, but Bondi has more or less confirmed that. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's honestly a little bit unsurprising given that Trump and Epstein were socializing together for a pretty good period of time there before a lot of these allegations came out. So the Journal story says that officials felt that there's unverified hearsay about many people, including Trump, in these files. One of the officials said that the documents contain hundreds of other names. Trump and Epstein both living in South Florida at the time, at least part-time. Some reporting by the Miami Herald has suggested that one of the Epstein accusers says she was first pulled into Epstein's orbit when she was working as a spa attendant at Mar-a-Lago. And so it's honestly not surprising that he would be named in the files in some fashion. The question is, what is the context of those?
But there's no evidence that there's anything nefarious that Trump did with Epstein. And as the White House spokesman, consistently say, Trump banished Epstein from Mar-a-Lago after an incident there, almost 20 years ago.
Right. Reportedly, again, this is the Miami Herald, he was banned after hitting on a member's daughter, according to a book.
After Epstein did.
Correct. That's why Trump banned him, according to this book. And so Alan Dershowitz, the lawyer who at one point represented Jeffrey Epstein, he wrote an op-ed in the Journal recently, and he says several interesting things. One is that Epstein never had a client list that he created. He says that the FBI interviewed alleged victims who named some of the alleged clients, but all this information is unverified. Some of it has been sealed to protect the names of the accusers. And by the way, he says that the alleged clients do not include any current office holders, which, according to Dershowitz, would rule out Trump.
Right. So, given all of that, Kate, the question becomes: how in the world did Republicans get into this mess? 2 weeks ago, Bondi, the AG, and the FBI issued a 2-page memo saying that they'd examined the files, found nothing, but then mega media erupted, and the Republicans on Capitol Hill panicked, and now here we are.
Well, there's no question that these various theories about whether Epstein killed himself, who was involved with him, was he blackmailing people, there's almost no end to the questions from this story that have been discussed on various podcasts and whatnot. And so there is a real way in which this story has now boomeranged, that there was so much festering of the discussion of this, and now the administration is reaping that whirlwind as they struggle to just contain a wildfire that's gone in directions they didn't expect. On the other hand, you do have Democrats who are happy to use this as a cudgel to destroy Trump whenever it is convenient. In his first term, Democrats used this story to tarnish the reputation, I think unfairly, of Alex Acosta, the labor secretary at the time, who had prosecuted Epstein. The smear was that he got a sweetheart deal, but I don't think the facts suggest that. I think Acosta was the prosecutor who put him in prison. But again, now Democrats have picked that back up and are playing on transparency as just because they want to keep the story going and keep the president talking about it and let this go on for weeks and weeks.
Let's go through the ways in which the Trump administration and the White House have been trying to handle this, or mishandle it, as the case might be. First, Trump told Bondi, ask the judge in the Epstein case to release some of the grand jury testimony. Pertinent was his word, pertinent grand jury testimony. Well, that's a key word, because what's pertinent and how you define that. And most grand jury testimony isn't released for reasons having to do with privacy, as you and Kate both know so well. But we have this revolt in the Rules Committee, and then now the Justice Department's dispatching the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche to interview Ghislaine Maxwell, who was now serving 20 years in prison for as an associate of Epstein. Why in the world do you send the Deputy AG to do that? You wouldn't usually send a junior. You wouldn't send a U.S. attorney to do that. You send a junior lawyer. But that said, it suggests we're looking into this again to see what we can find. James Comer on the Oversight Committee has said that a lot of his members want to subpoena Maxwell to come and testify before the House. That would be some spectacle. In some ways, the Republicans are keeping the story alive.
Yeah, I think they've created this problem for themselves in large part because they fed these kind of theories about Epstein, and they said, when you put us back in power, we will get to the bottom of this. We will unravel this thread. And so I think that Trump is trying to do something that he can say. But to the clip that we played of Mike Johnson, I think that I would have maybe a different takeaway of the fact that Democrats were in power and had this material and looked at it and didn't think that any of it was chargeable or releasable. And Republicans are now in power and are looking at it and are telling the same story, that none of this information is chargeable and releasable. Kash Patel, the FBI director, who again fanned these theories when he was out of office, going on podcasts and being anti-establishment and saying that, this is a big conspiracy. We don't know. We need to see the files. Now he's the FBI director, and he's going on podcasts and trying to talk people down from the position that he was taking when he was out of power, saying, if I was in charge and we had videos of prominent people on this island committing crimes, don't you think we would do something about it? And maybe some of that audience is convinced, but a large share of them seem not to be convinced.
Well, Kate, they could have. They tried to do this, Bondi and Patel, in that memo. Why didn't they just stick to it and say, when mega erupted, and just say, I'm sorry, this is what we found, and it isn't chargeable, and this kind of thing happens. There's episode from American history that is analogous here. When in the early nation, Alexander Hamilton, when he was Treasury Secretary, was accused of all kinds of criminal behavior by the anti-federalists. He was accused of being in league with the British, corrupt. So what happens? His administration, John Adams loses to Jefferson. Jefferson appoints Albert Gallatin to the Treasury. Gallatin scours, this is according to Ron Chernow's book, biography of Hamilton. Gallatin scours the Treasury looking for something to have on Hamilton. He finds nothing at all. So I mean, this is the kind of thing that happens, but now the Republicans in the administration, the House, they're running for cover. Should they have just said, sorry, there's nothing here, and tried to ride it out?
I think that's still what they need to do. And I appreciate the reminder of how far we've come from Alexander Hamilton in our discussion here.
Okay, I'm not comparing those people to the actors here. I'm saying the situation is analogous.
Yes, but I think writing it out is what they need to do. I mean, I think it would be constructive to try again to give a substantive press conference reciting what facts they do know and the details of why they won't be releasing this information. And the details are compelling. There appears to be child pornography, victims' personal information. This is one reason, I might add, why who you pick for AG is so important. And I think charitably, Trump wanted different qualities in his nominees this time and felt he was ill-served by people of independent stature. But I think one lesson here is that actually you do want someone with independent stature who can give a lot of credibility behind why they're not releasing this material and why they're not going to deviate from the standard practice on material that's not chargeable or releasable.
Yeah, that Bondi does have the, I think, the liability, Kyle, of being seen as too much of somebody who does Trump's bidding, particularly based on a couple of the early events in this administration, and that has hurt her, no question, in terms of speaking with authority. What do you think about Kate's idea, though? Pam Bondi steps up, Kash Patel may be there, Dan Bongino, the deputy AG, if he's willing to appear on the same stage with her after their disagreements in the Oval Office, go up there and say, look, we looked at this. This is what we have found. It's not anything chargeable. We can't release these files. And in fact, it would be wrong to do so because it might be a violation of people's privacy, might malign people unfairly, who are accused without any real evidence, just as hearsay. If the Democrats saw something chargeable, they could have done it. And do you think that they would have spared Donald Trump over that time when they were trying to put him in jail for any number of other things?
Sure. I think that might be helpful. I mean, what I would add to the point at which I agree with on Kate's point about Pam Bondi's credibility is she also did herself no favors when early in her tenure, she was asked a question about, is there an Epstein client list? Are you going to release that? And she said, I have it on my desk to review right now. So she created some of her own credibility problem here. But to the extent that the Justice Department can characterize with some more specificity what it has, that might be helpful in terms of giving people an understanding of what this stuff is, which might be as simple as asking witnesses to Epstein's conduct. You were on the plane. Who else did you see on the plane? And there's a list of names of people who might be on the plane. And that is not criminal necessarily. Epstein's reputation and his behavior was so awful that even being on the plane is reputational poison. And so there is a reason that the Justice Department does not release that kind of information if people if they don't have evidence that those people on that plane committed a crime or knew any crime was going on or that there was any crime on the plane while they were also on the plane. But to the extent that they can make clear that those are many of these mentions. If that's the case, that could do some good.
I mean, be specific about the reasons why they aren't releasing it.
Right, and be specific about if it's true, as Dershowitz says, that there are no allegations of criminal conduct by Donald Trump, saying that might be helpful, giving some more context.
Well, I can tell you what the first question at the presser will be, or the first comment on the next MSNBC commentator will be, well, okay, if there's nothing wrong, why don't you tell it? Why don't you show us the references? And so the problem is in this, if you release partial transcripts or partial information, there's always going to be somebody who says, oh, okay, well, what about the others? What else are they hiding? And that's the danger they have. So at some point you just have to say, I can't do it, and suffer whatever political consequences you do from that. And that gets to, Kate, whether or not the public even cares about this, other than as pure gawking entertainment about another fiasco in Washington. I mean, I guess parts of the MAGA base, Trump's MAGA base, podcasters and so on, and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others do care about this or pretend to care. But I wonder how much the average Trump voter really cares about this if there's nothing more that we learn than what we have learned and already know about Trump. And even the stories of the last couple of weeks don't tell us much more about Trump and Epstein's relationship. We knew it existed. We knew they carried on in New York circles before Epstein was prosecuted and before Trump banished him from Mar-a-Lago. We haven't heard anything about their relationship since then, no new information. So are voters going to care?
No. I mean, what you're fundamentally getting at is that I have followed this story somewhat closely against my will, but I don't even know what we are aiming to know by the end of this exercise. Are we trying to do justice to the victims? Well, relitigating a lot of these allegations could be very painful for the victims and the people named. We also have Maxwell already in jail. Are we trying to learn whether Epstein really killed himself? Well, we have Dershowitz on the record saying he killed himself. The question is whether he had some help, which may be possible. It is not obvious what we are trying to learn. And so I think that the theory of the case, which is that this is a train wreck that people can't really look away from, and there's always some new twist to explore, is the accurate one. But no, I do not think this is going to command any sustained attention from voters. And part of the frustration is that Congress is getting derailed from, its basic work like funding the government to debate over new things we are not going to learn about Jeff Epstein. It's just a sign of the bad times we're in, I guess.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to recall that Bill Barr was Attorney General at the time that Epstein killed himself, and he did look into this about the whether or not Epstein did. He looked at it, examined it closely, because there were some stakes about the credibility of the Justice Department and the security of jails, and he said there's no evidence that he didn't.
Well, Bill Barr is part of the deep state, Paul, and Pam Bondi is part of the deep state, and Kash Patel is part of the deep state. And I say,
and of course, you are part of the deep state, sir.
Definitely,
you're deeply in there.
But I mean, it's a joke, but there's an element of storytelling about this, I think, by this whole new ecosystem of alternative media and podcasts that are interested in riling people up and getting attention and making waves. And so that's why we have stories floating around about maybe Taylor Swift is involved in rigging the Super Bowl in order to announce some engagement with the Kansas City Chiefs player to help Joe Biden. And then it's storytelling for them. And the mistake, and what I don't really understand, other than that Congress always wants to duck any sort of criticism, is why there is so much pandering to that. And nobody willing to stand up and say, like, this is all nonsense that is being fed to people who some of them are maybe watching it as entertainment. Some of them maybe don't really believe it all, or don't believe some of it. Some people maybe do. But somebody should be out there saying, like, we're gonna have a vote on funding the government instead of focusing on this kind of popcorn stuff.
Well, but they couldn't get the votes in the Rules Committee to proceed with that. So that's one of the problems here. The Republicans, backbenchers, have panicked. And of course, this isn't going away, Kate. I mean, you can go back to your district for 6 weeks. You can take your Codell to wherever you want to, Tokyo or Mallorca. But you cannot avoid coming back, and the Democrats are going to drive this as long as they see it has some media and political potential. So they're going to have to vote on it one way or another, or have stand up and say, look, we're not going to do it for the following reasons, and then just squeeze the members to say, look, we're not going to, we're going to suck it up. We don't think this is a problem. And I thought part of the problem is Johnson's original statement after the Kash Patel Bengino memo was that, well, I think they should release the document. So he kind of broke first. And then now I thought his statement that we showed was actually not bad when it comes to actually stating a reason why the Democrats don't have a lot of credibility on this. But they just got to say, they've got to show at least some open kimono on why why they haven't found anything here, and why there's actually good reason not to release raw files that may malign people.
Well, to Johnson's earlier statement point, I mean, let's stipulate that perhaps at some point many news cycles ago, there was a group of people here that thought more information could be helpful to settling the story. And so some lawmakers are now caught in between that, with Democrats trying to jam them into voting for transparency that I think pretty clearly at this point isn't going to tell us anything substantive that we don't already know, and is going to further inflame the discussion about it. The one part of this story that I think is worth dwelling on is that it is an indictment of the public's ability to trust institutions. So while I understand I am throwing a Hail Mary pass here, this actually is an opportunity for some bipartisan rebuilding of institutions. Now, to Kyle's point that you've had a Democrat with the keys to this file cabinet not finding anything of substance in there, and Republicans in there as well, ruling, the death was a suicide. We looked at it. I mean, this is as much kind of bipartisan continuity as really you can expect in Washington these days. And so that's why I think the council on both the political and cultural merits for Trump is to ride it out and continue to insist that they've given the facts that are worth giving, and that's the end of it.
And perhaps having Pam Bondi with the FBI director there holding a presser and saying, all right, this is what we have found. This is why we're doing what we're doing. So, and then taking some questions and saying, look, I want to take the heat. One of the great benefits, one of the reasons that I respect Bill Barr is that when he was Attorney General, he took the heat. Sometimes he took the heat from Trump. Sometimes, more often he took the heat from the press. Because you're covering up part of the Mueller report. Turned out, he took abuse for that for 2 weeks because he only released the summary of it at first, and it turns out he wasn't covering anything up. But Barr had real guts and authority, and Bondi hasn't shown that so far, Kyle.
Yeah, accountability, I think, is a big part of this, because it is easy to be on the outside, to be throwing bricks, to be saying, I demand full transparency. And it's a lot harder when you're in there trying to make the decision of exactly what to redact. A lot of this material is child abuse material. The government is not going to release that. Whose names
and shouldn't.
Whose names do you cut out of this document? Does this document actually add anything to the public knowledge? The other thought that I would add here is maybe there's a lesson about feeding these kinds of theories and how they can come back to bite you in the end. And maybe we haven't seen the end of this MAGA discontent, because Donald Trump says the 2020 election was stolen, and if you put me back in office, Pam Bondi is going to get to the bottom of that. There's January 6th theories about that being a deep state thing. He's talking about the 2016 election now, and how Obama and the intelligence officers were doing a treasonous plot to undermine his victory. And if he promises to deliver the goods and then is unable to deliver the goods, people who believe the promise are going to be upset.
Even if there are no goods to deliver. All right. Thank you, Kyle Peterson. Thank you, Kate Odell. Appreciate your being here. Thank you all for listening. We are here every day on Potomac Watch. Thanks for listening.